What's up, guys? This is Bryce Van Hoosen. Today, we're going to be finding out what the hell is up with these tungsten blocks that I keep seeing. Alright, so I'm sure all of you have probably had the same thought at some point in your life when browsing the interwebs and looking at various different block materials. We've got big brass, small brass, there's copper, there's stone, which I am particularly very fond of. I think that one sounds the best. But for this guitar, where basically the area for putting a big stone block in it is somewhat limited, so I thought, hey, let's try this tungsten stuff out. So, tungsten, as you can see from kind of my comparison of weights between the stock steel block and the tungsten block, is like twice as heavy. Even though it's technically the same size block, it apparently is a much more dense material. I'm not a metallurgist or anything like that, so correct me if I'm wrong. So what I did is I did a couple different takes with a before and an after, where I was playing along to the Silver Talon track Next to the Sun, which is on our 2021 album Decadence and Decay. Check that out if you're into what you're hearing. But I basically re-recorded that. I used this here Fryette Pitbull for all of the sounds, both clean and dirty. I wanted to choose something that would give us kind of a nice contrast between something clean, something dirty, so we can really kind of hear the minutia of sort of what's happening between the blocks here. And lastly, I did sort of a sustain comparison, because these things are always advertised as increasing sustain, so we'll find out if that's actually the case. So let's listen to the before and after block comparison, and then we're gonna pop back here and I'll give you my thoughts. Okay, so much to my surprise, I mean, I don't know how much stock I put into all of this kind of stuff before. I knew it made some kind of difference in feel and sort of the responsiveness of the guitar, but insofar as actually changing the tone of the guitar, I'm not sure if I bought it that much, right? You know, sort of made things louder or quieter or whatever. There is a tonal difference between the stock steel block and the tungsten block. Whether or not that's good or one's better than the other, that's sort of your opinion, but in my ears, what I am hearing is that there is kind of a bit of a cut to the mids just acoustically that's happening in the tungsten block versus the steel block, right? So the steel block seems to have a little bit more of kind of that honky mid kind of part of the guitar signal, stuff that I usually tend to sort of cut out around kind of, you know, the 400 or 500 hertz range, right? The real sort of kind of telephone signal. And the tungsten one just doesn't have that, which in some instances kind of does give it the illusion of having less volume, because you can definitely hear in that intro lead, the clean lead, it sounds quieter on the tungsten one, whereas everything else, you know, the highs, a lot more highs, a lot more lows, it's all kind of excited in that way, whereas the steel one is kind of just much more in that sort of guitar range. I do think that the tungsten one is a little bit more pleasing to the ear, but, you know, of course, these are kind of moves that you could make with an EQ and probably would be made with an EQ, but hey, here's one less step that you have to do when you're actually recording the guitar, right? So then in terms of the chord test, it looks like, and I've tried this a number of different times and I tried to make everything as even as possible and there was no getting around it, the steel one actually had more sustain. Whether or not you're gonna let a chord just sort of hang out there for 2, 4, 6, 8 bars, I guess that's up to you, but the steel one actually did that, whereas the tungsten one, it kind of died off a little bit sooner. I will say a benefit of the tungsten one is that it felt a lot more strong throughout, right? Like that note was really kind of, it was full, it was sort of in your face, whereas the steel one kind of started off a little bit more relaxed, I guess. It wasn't necessarily quite as punchy, probably owing to, you know, just more of that kind of honky mid-range content there. And then it sort of started to get this really kind of like kind of sub sound toward the very end, which was interesting. And it sounds cool, you know, I guess if you're doing kind of like a big open at the beginning of a set or something like that, and you want that really sort of wild kind of feedback there. Awesome. And then third test I did is I changed my strings after having recorded the tungsten version, because the strings that I was using previously, yeah, man, they were a couple months old, played a few shows with them, etc., so dirty strings. And this really was sort of so I could find out, hey, what is going to make the biggest difference in your tone, right? Is changing the block going to have a noticeable effect that is more or less so or different than just going from old strings to new strings, right? Something we do all the time. So let's check it out and we'll listen to tungsten before with old dirty crappy strings and tungsten after with clean new strings. What I learned from that little experiment is, yeah, your strings, new strings definitely sound better, which should come as a shock to nobody, but I guess there's proof of that old saying, change your strings. And secondly, yeah, what I was hearing with the tungsten block, it's definitely not a fluke. That's kind of carried over, and though things sort of got brighter and kind of a little bit more bloomier and sort of in your face, it still had that same kind of response that the tungsten block had with the old dirty strings, meaning, you know, a lot of highs, a lot of lows, and the mids kind of, you know, were cut a little bit, scooped out, if you will. So there you have it, man. Tungsten versus the stock steel block. You know, there is a difference. I don't know exactly what I was expecting. I think I like the tungsten block, you know, simply because it weighs more, and I don't know. To me, heavier things just kind of feel more quality, I guess. So let me know your thoughts. Are you gonna run out and grab a tungsten block and change it all over? Spend 15 grand changing all your guitars from the stock steel block to tungsten? Let me know. I don't recommend it. But hey, it's your life. If you made it this far, know that I appreciate you watching the video, and I will see you very soon. Whoa.